It was New Year's Eve, 1869. With the Civil War ended, the tragedy of President Lincoln's assassination fading from a shocked nation's mind, and a new hero figure in the White House in the person of President Grant, people were looking for better and happier days. But the shadow of uncertainty still hung over the land, and many of the celebrants on this New Year's Eve would be glad to see 1869 pass into history. 1870 was bound to be a better year, and so the celebrants at the great party in the fashionable New York mansion danced gaily to the lilting music of the specially hired orchestra and washed down a sumptuous dinner with buckets of champagne. It was close to 10 o'clock, and Julia Glasson was dancing in a lively group of 8 to the strains of a mazurka. Her partner in the group, handsome in his evening dress and with the serious features, raven black hair, and sideburns of a young Prince Albert, was the young man from Chicago she'd come to know and love within the short space of a few weeks, Gregory Hunt. Julia smiled at him as they came together briefly in the dance. She was elegantly clad in a pale green gown that set off her blonde hair, large blue eyes, and delicate white skin. She was regarded as a beauty in a segment of society where charm and beauty were fairly common. The Glasson name was a magic one in New York social circles. Julia was immensely wealthy and lived with her Aunt Cornelia Warden in a fabulous brownstone mansion in the most exclusive section of Fifth Avenue. Yet she was a lonely and often unhappy young woman. At the young age of 22, she was almost completely alone in the world except for her Aunt Cornelia. Her mother and father had both died early in life, and aside from a few distant relatives in New England and the Midwest, she had no one to look after her except her mother's older sister. Of course, there were the usual lawyers and bankers to take care of the business affairs of the estate and to protect her financial interests. But she had only her Aunt Cornelia to turn to for affection. At least that had been the case until she'd met Gregory Hunt. Meeting Gregory had changed her entire outlook on life. Naturally, Aunt Cornelia had been alarmed and angry from the moment Julia had told her about the handsome young man. Aunt Cornelia was a rather mannish spinster, heavy of frame, Spartan in dress, and severe of countenance. She had eliminated romance in her own life, and Julia feared she might try to do the same for her. One late November afternoon, as she'd sat on the divan with her aunt in the maroon-draped, luxurious bedroom occupied by the older woman on the top floor of the fine house, she'd pleaded with her for understanding. "Gregory is a fine person," Julia said. "He says he loves me, and I love him. I'd like to marry him." Aunt Cornelia's reaction was to sniff indignantly. "That young man is after your money." "No," Julia protested. Her aunt's mannish face took on a cynical look. "You say no, but you're really in the dark about him. What has he told you beyond the fact his family lives in Chicago?" Her aunt had hit on a weak point in Julia's defense of the young man. He had told her very little about himself. Now she tried to present the case for him as best she could. She said, "From what he has told me, his mother is a fine woman, his father is dead, and Gregory is the only one his mother has. She lives in the family home in Chicago with a young woman to keep her company, a distant cousin of Gregory's." She hesitated a second. "I would assume they are at least well-to-do. Gregory worked for a Chicago banking house before he came here to become associated with the New York branch." "If he were really well off, he'd still be in Chicago looking after the family's business interests," was Aunt Cornelia's opinion. Julia registered distress. "I don't care whether he has any money or not." "Now we have the truth of it. I want to marry him." "And he undoubtedly wishes to marry you," Aunt Cornelia said acidly, "since it is a sure way of gaining control of your fortune." "You're so bitter, Aunt Cornelia," Julia protested unhappily. "How can I make you understand?"